The chandeliers of Ashford House blazed with 1,000 candles, their light dancing across silk gowns and jeweled throats. Miss Philippa Collymore pressed herself against the wall near the potted palms, a shadow among the brilliance. Her gown, a muslin confection in pale blue that had been fashionable 5 years prior, hung loosely where it should have clung. The fabric faded from too many washings. The hem let down twice to accommodate her height. She had tried. The modest lace at her sleeves had been added just yesterday, her fingers aching from the delicate work by candlelight. But in this glittering assembly, her best efforts rendered her invisible at best, pitiable at worst. She watched the couples whirl past in the waltz, their movements fluid and assured, belonging to a world she could observe but never truly inhabit. Her aunt, Lady Margaret Collymore, had secured their invitation through a distant connection. A final desperate attempt to see Philippa settled before time rendered all such attempts futile. At 24, she had long since resigned herself to spinsterhood. The lack of dowry, the absence of connections, the unfortunate timing of her father's financial ruin just before her debut, all had conspired to place marriage beyond her reach. She was reaching for a glass of lemonade when the voices found her. "My dear, is that gown from your grandmother's trousseau?" Lady Cassandra Pemberton's crystalline laugh cut through the music like shattering glass. How wonderfully historical. Philippa's hand froze. She turned slowly, finding herself encircled by 3 young women whose gowns probably cost more than her aunt's quarterly income. Lady Cassandra, resplendent in cream silk embroidered with gold thread, stood at the center like a beautiful venomous flower. "I believe it's meant to be fashionable," Miss Hartwick added, her eyes traveling over Philippa's dress with theatrical bewilderment. "Perhaps where she comes from, they haven't yet received word of the current century?" Heat flooded Philippa's cheeks, but she kept her chin level. "The gown serves its purpose adequately." "Oh, it serves a purpose indeed," Lady Cassandra purred, stepping closer. Her perfume, something expensive and cloying, invaded Philippa's senses. "It reminds us all how fortunate we are. Tell me, do you also wear your mother's cast-off undergarments, or have you managed some small economy there?" The cruelty of it stole Philippa's breath. Around them, conversations had begun to falter, heads turning toward the spectacle. She felt the weight of dozens of eyes, the whispers beginning like rustling leaves before a storm. Miss Hartwick's giggle pierced the moment, joined by Lady Helena's louder guffaw. Philippa's hands trembled. She would not cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. But neither could she remain standing there, enduring their mockery while the entire ballroom witnessed her humiliation. She turned, her vision blurring and, blurring, walked, not ran, though her legs ached to flee, toward the door leading to the retiring rooms. "Do hurry back," Lady Cassandra called after her, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "We so enjoy your company." The laughter that followed Philippa through the door was like knives in her back. She found herself in a dim corridor, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The retiring room lay ahead, but the thought of encountering other ladies, of having to compose her face and pretend all was well, proved unbearable. Instead, she turned left, trying doors until one yielded beneath her hand. The room beyond was blessedly dark and quiet. A small library, she realized, as her eyes adjusted to the firelight. She slipped inside, pressing the door closed behind her, and finally allowed herself to lean against the solid wood, her composure crumbling. "I find balls insufferable as well," a male voice observed from the darkness, though perhaps for different reasons. Philippa's eyes flew open. A figure unfolded from a leather chair near the fireplace, and as he moved into the light, her mortification reached new heights. She recognized him instantly. Everyone in London would. Alexander Sinclair, Duke of Thornbury, regarded her with an expression of mild curiosity, rather than the irritation or scandal she might have expected. He was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of classical features that belonged on Roman coins. His evening clothes were impeccable, his cravat a masterpiece of simplicity that paradoxically announced his status more clearly than any ostentation could. He held a book in one hand, his finger marking his place. "Your Grace," she managed, curtsying despite her distress. "I apologize for the intrusion. I did not know the room was occupied." "Clearly, or you would have chosen a different sanctuary." He studied her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of her blotchy face and trembling hands. "Though I confess myself curious about what drives a lady to seek solitude at what is purportedly the event of the season." Philippa straightened, reaching for the shreds of her dignity. "Personal matters, Your Grace. I shall leave you to your book." "Please don't." The words were unexpected, as was the gesture he made toward a chair opposite his own. "I've been hiding in here for the better part of an hour, and I find actual conversation infinitely more appealing than whatever drivel Lord Byron is attempting in these pages." Despite everything, a small, startled laugh escaped her. "You find Lord Byron dull?" "I find him overwrought." He set the book aside, his attention fully upon her now. "All that angst over lost love and Mediterranean sunsets? Give me a good history or a properly researched treatise on agricultural improvements any day." "Agricultural improvements," she repeated, uncertain whether he was mocking her. "I have estates to manage," he said with a slight shrug. "And I've found that crop rotation is far more reliable than romantic poetry when it comes to ensuring one's tenants are fed." He tilted his head, his dark eyes penetrating in the firelight. "But you're attempting to leave, and I'm preventing you. Shall I call for a maid to escort you to the retiring room?" "No." The word emerged too quickly, and she saw understanding flicker across his features. "Ah," he said quietly. "The retiring room is where the other ladies gather." It was not a question, and the gentle perception in his tone threatened to undo her composure entirely. She looked away, blinking rapidly. "I've found," he continued, as though discussing nothing more significant than the weather, "that the opinions of those who measure worth by the cost of fabric are opinions rarely worth having. Though I imagine that observation provides little comfort when one is on the receiving end of their displeasure." "You saw." The words tasted bitter. "I hear Lady Cassandra's voice tends to carry when she wishes to be cruel. Which I've observed is often." He leaned back in his chair, utterly at ease in a way that somehow made her feel less exposed. "She has been angling for my attention this entire season. I have been studiously avoiding giving it to her." "Then you have excellent taste, Your Grace." His mouth quirked. "In avoiding predatory debutantes? I should hope so. Tell me, Miss Collymore, Philippa Collymore. Miss Collymore." He said her name as though it mattered, as though she were someone worth remembering. "What brings you to this unbearable crush of humanity, if not the prospect of finding a husband willing to overlook an unfashionable gown?" The bluntness should have offended her. Instead, it felt oddly liberating. "My aunt's hope springs eternal, despite all evidence to the contrary." "Evidence such as?" "I am 24, without fortune or connections, and as you've observed, my wardrobe is several years behind the current fashion." She met his gaze directly, daring him to look away. "I am, in short, precisely the sort of woman the marriage mart has no use for." "And yet here you are," he observed, "demonstrating more honest speech in 5 minutes than I've encountered in 5 years of London seasons. That seems valuable." "It seems unmarketable, Your Grace." "Perhaps," he conceded. "But then, the marriage mart values all the wrong things, doesn't it? Beauty that fades, fortunes that can be lost, connections that shift with every scandal. While intelligence, integrity, genuine feeling, These are dismissed as unnecessary ornaments. Philippa found herself staring at him. You sound as cynical as I feel. Experience tends to breed cynicism, or wisdom. I haven't yet decided which I've acquired. He stood and she realized with a start that he was about to leave. Thank you for the conversation, Miss Collymore. It was unexpectedly refreshing. Thank you for not treating me as an object of pity, Your Grace. Something shifted in his expression, a warmth that transformed his austere features. You misunderstand, Miss Collymore. I don't pity you at all. In fact, I find myself envying your clarity. You know precisely who you are and what the world thinks of you, and you face it with your spine straight. That's rather magnificent. Before she could formulate a response to this extraordinary statement, he bowed and left the room, the door closing softly behind him. Philippa remained standing there, her heart beating strangely, the weight of humiliation somehow lighter than it had been moments before. She did not return to the ballroom that night. The following morning arrived with the pale gold light of an English spring, and Philippa woke with the memory of dark eyes and unexpected kindness lingering in her mind. She tried to dismiss it as she dressed in her day gown. Another reformed creation, this one a simple muslin in spring green, but the Duke's words kept returning to her. Rather magnificent. No one had ever described her thus. You seem thoughtful this morning, Aunt Margaret observed over breakfast, her gentle eyes knowing. Did something occur at the ball after I retired? Philippa hesitated, then shook her head. Nothing of consequence, Aunt. But it felt like a lie, even as she spoke it. 3 days later, she was walking in Hyde Park during the fashionable hour, or rather, slightly before it, when ladies of modest means could enjoy the paths without encountering the cream of society. The morning was crisp, the air carrying the scent of early blooms, and Philippa had almost convinced herself that she had imagined the unusual quality of her encounter with the Duke. Then she rounded a bend in the path and found him there, standing beside the Serpentine, apparently absorbed in watching the waterfowl. Her first instinct was to turn back, to avoid what could only be an awkward acknowledgement of their previous meeting. But he had already seen her, and to her surprise, his face lit with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. Miss Collymore, he said, approaching with long strides. What excellent timing. I was just wondering whether swans are naturally aggressive or simply misunderstood. The absurdity of the statement startled a laugh from her. I believe they're both, Your Grace. Aggressive because they're misunderstood, perhaps. A philosophical approach to ornithology. How refreshing. He fell into step beside her, apparently unconcerned with the impropriety of walking with an unchaperoned lady. Are you an early riser by preference, or necessity? Necessity, mostly. The park is less crowded at this hour. By which you mean Lady Cassandra and her ilk are still abed. I wouldn't presume to comment on Lady Cassandra's habits, Your Grace. How diplomatic. His tone suggested amusement. I, on the other hand, will happily presume. She rises late because she was up until dawn, analyzing every slight and calculating every social maneuver. It's exhausting work, being that unpleasant. Philippa bit her lip to suppress a smile. You speak very freely for a duke. I find that my title gives me permission to be honest where others must dissemble. One of its few genuine advantages. He paused beside a small grove of trees, his expression turning more serious. Though I confess myself curious, Miss Collymore. Why do you continue subjecting yourself to the season? You don't strike me as someone who enjoys society's games. I don't, she admitted. But my aunt has hopes, and I cannot bring myself to disappoint her. She gave me a home when I had none, and if enduring a few balls and morning calls gives her pleasure, it seems a small price to pay. That's remarkably selfless. Or remarkably cowardly. I haven't decided which. They walked in silence for a few moments, and Philippa found it surprisingly comfortable. The Duke seemed content to simply exist beside her, requiring no performance, no careful curation of words and expressions. "Tell me," he said eventually, "what would you do if you could do anything? If society's expectations and your aunt's hopes didn't signify?" The question caught her unprepared. No one had ever asked her such a thing. I suppose I would read. Travel, perhaps, if such a thing were possible for a woman alone. I'd like to see the Lake District, or Scotland. And I would write. Write what? Essays, perhaps. Observations about the world, about people. Nothing that would ever be published, of course. Why not? Because I'm a woman, Your Grace, and women who write are either anonymous or objects of scandal. Fair point, he conceded. Though I'd argue the world needs more honest observation and less polite fiction. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Would you think me mad if I told you I find you fascinating, Miss Collymore? Her breath caught. I would think you either mad or mocking, Your Grace. Neither, I assure you. His expression was earnest, almost vulnerable. You're the first person I've spoken with in years who doesn't want something from me. Who doesn't calculate every word for maximum advantage. You simply speak. It's extraordinary. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted nearby. A well-dressed woman was berating a young maidservant, her voice shrill with fury. Clumsy creature, look what you've done to my hem! The maid, no more than 15, was trembling, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't see. Of course you didn't see. Your sort never does. The woman raised her hand as if to strike the girl. Philippa didn't think. She simply moved, crossing the distance and catching the woman's wrist before the blow could land. Madam, she said, her voice cold with fury, I believe you've made your point. The girl has apologized. The woman sputtered, her face reddening. How dare you? Do you know who I am? I know you're someone willing to strike a child over a bit of mud on your hem. Philippa released the woman's wrist, positioning herself between the lady and the maid, which tells me everything I need to know about your character. I shall have you. You shall have nothing. The Duke's voice cut through the woman's threat like a blade. He had materialized beside Philippa, his expression glacial. Unless you wish me to inform your husband about your gambling debts, I believe they've reached a rather impressive sum, Lady Worthing. The woman paled, glanced between them, then gathered her skirts and fled without another word. Philippa turned to the maid, her anger evaporating into concern. Are you hurt? No, miss. Thank you, miss. The girl bobbed a curtsy, her eyes wide, then hurried away before anyone else could take notice. Only then did Philippa realize what she'd done, how publicly, how rashly. She looked at the Duke, half expecting to see censure or embarrassment. Instead, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. That, he said quietly, was extraordinary. That was foolish. I should not have interfered. You should not have had to interfere. The fact that you did, that you risked social censure to protect someone with no power to protect themselves. He shook his head, something like wonder in his voice. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Common decency shouldn't be rare, Your Grace. And yet it is. Most people would have walked past, unwilling to risk Lady Worthing's displeasure. He studied her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. You're unlike anyone I've ever met, Miss Collymore. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning that Philippa was afraid to examine too closely. She looked away, suddenly aware of how much she wanted to believe him, how dangerous such wanting could be. I should return home, she said softly. My aunt will wonder where I've gone. Of course. But he didn't move, and neither did she. Miss Collymore, might I call upon you? Properly, with your aunt present? Her heart gave a painful lurch. Your Grace, I don't think... Please. The single word carried a vulnerability that undid her. Not because I pity you, not because I'm bored, because I find your company the most genuine pleasure I've experienced in longer than I can remember. She should refuse. She should protect herself from the inevitable pain of hoping for something impossible. But when she looked at him, she saw not the untouchable Duke of Thornbury, but simply a man who seemed as lonely as she felt. Very well, she whispered. You may call. The smile that transformed his face was worth every risk. The weeks that followed existed in a strange suspension of reality. True to his word, the Duke called upon them 3 times that first week, then 4 times the next. He sat in their modest drawing room as though it were the finest salon in London, discussing books and politics and agricultural improvements with a genuine enthusiasm that made even Aunt Margaret smile. Philippa tried to guard her heart. She reminded herself daily that this was temporary, that dukes did not marry penniless nobodies, that his interest would wane once the novelty wore off. But with each visit, each conversation, each moment when his eyes met hers with that particular warmth, her defenses crumbled a little more. He cares for you, Aunt Margaret said one evening after the Duke had left. I've lived long enough to recognize genuine affection. He finds me amusing, Philippa corrected gently. An interesting diversion from his usual society. You underestimate yourself, my dear, and perhaps you underestimate him as well. But Philippa couldn't allow herself such hope. Hope was dangerous when one's position was so precarious. Then the rumors began. It started as whispers at the modiste's shop, pointed looks at the circulating library. Lady Cassandra's voice, Philippa suspected, though she couldn't prove it. The Duke of Thornbury had developed a tundra for poor Miss Collymore. How convenient for her. How calculated. Obviously, she was using her poverty to prey upon his sympathies. A clever trap for a wealthy duke. Feign humility while angling for a coronet. The words cut deeper than any criticism of her gowns had ever managed. That others should think her capable of such manipulation, that they should taint something genuine with their cynical assumptions, felt like a violation. When the Duke called the following Tuesday, she asked her aunt to send him away. Philippa, Aunt Margaret protested, surely you don't believe... It doesn't matter what I believe. It matters what they say. I won't be responsible for damaging his reputation, for making him the object of ridicule. She blinked back tears. Please, Aunt, tell him I'm indisposed. But that evening, Lord Christopher Bellamy appeared at their door, his expression grave. Miss Collymore, he said, after the initial pleasantries, I come at my own instigation, not Alex's. He doesn't know I'm here. Alex? The intimacy of the nickname startled her. We've been friends since Eton, and in all those years, I've never seen him as he's been these past weeks. Alive, genuine, happy. Whatever is happening between you, it's real on his part. I'd stake my life on it. Philippa's throat tightened. That makes it worse, my lord. If his feelings are genuine, then he deserves better than to be mocked for caring about someone so beneath him. Beneath him? Lord Bellamy's eyebrows rose. Miss Collymore, you defended a servant from violence in front of half the ton. You speak your mind without calculation. You make him laugh at agricultural treatises, for God's sake. If anything, he might be beneath you. The world doesn't see it that way. Then perhaps, he said gently, the world needs correcting. But that can only happen if you give it the chance. If you give him the chance. After he left, Philippa sat in the darkening drawing room, her heart at war with her reason. She had spent so long accepting her place, accommodating herself to disappointment, that the possibility of something different felt almost painful. What would you do? Aunt Margaret asked softly from the doorway. If you weren't afraid? The question echoed the Duke's words from weeks before, and Philippa realized, with sudden clarity, that she had been asking the wrong questions. Not what does society think, but what do I want? Not what can I have, but what am I brave enough to reach for? But before she could act on this revelation, an invitation arrived for another ball at Ashford House. 3 weeks had passed since the night of her humiliation, and the prospect of returning to that glittering ballroom made her stomach clench. You don't have to attend, Aunt Margaret said. But Philippa looked at the invitation and thought of the Duke's words. Spine straight, rather magnificent. She had run once. Perhaps it was time to stand her ground. I'll go, she said, and I'll wear the blue gown again. Her aunt's eyes widened. Philippa, if they're going to mock me, let them mock me for who I actually am, not some version of myself that I've tried to hide. She managed a shaky smile. Besides, I've added some new lace to the sleeves. Very fashionable. The night of the ball arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. Philippa dressed carefully, her hands steady despite her racing heart. The blue gown looked better than it had. She'd worked on it every evening, adding small touches, letting out seams. It was still clearly old, still obviously inexpensive. But it was clean and well-mended, and she held her head high as she and her aunt entered Ashford House. The ballroom blazed exactly as it had before, and Philippa felt the familiar weight of eyes upon her. Whispers followed in her wake, some curious, some cruel. She saw Lady Cassandra holding court near the refreshment table, her expression triumphant. This was a mistake, Philippa thought. But before she could flee, Lady Cassandra's voice rang out across the room. Why, Miss Collymore, how brave of you to return. And in the same gown, no less. How wonderfully economical. The laughter that followed was exactly as Philippa remembered, cutting and cruel. She felt her resolve wavering, her carefully constructed courage beginning to fracture. Around her, the ballroom seemed to hold its breath, anticipating another spectacle. Then a voice, cool and commanding, sliced through the mockery. Indeed, Lady Cassandra. I've always found that those secure in their worth have no need for constant adornment, while those who must rely entirely on expensive silks to create an impression, well, one rather wonders what they're attempting to conceal. The Duke of Thornbury materialized beside Philippa, as though he'd been conjured by her need. He looked magnificent in his evening blacks, his cravat a masterwork of understated elegance, his entire bearing radiating the kind of power that came not from cruelty, but from absolute certainty of one's position. Lady Cassandra's smile froze. Your Grace, You merely what? His tone could have frozen the Thames. Attempted once again to elevate yourself by diminishing another? It's become something of a pattern with you, hasn't it? I confess I find it tedious. The silence that fell was absolute. Philippa could hear her own heartbeat, feel the shock rippling through the assembled guests. Dukes did not involve themselves in such matters. Dukes certainly did not publicly rebuke ladies of quality in defense of penniless nobodies. Miss Collymore, he continued, turning to face her, his expression softening. I wonder if you might grant me the honor of this dance. It was a waltz. Of course it was a waltz, the most intimate of dances, the one that would set every tongue wagging. Philippa's mind raced. To refuse would be an insult. To accept would be to expose herself to even more scrutiny, more speculation, more danger. She looked at him and saw not the Duke of Thornbury, but Alexander, the man who had called her magnificent, who had listened to her dreams, who had somehow seen her when she had spent years being invisible. The honor would be mine, Your Grace. His hand was warm as it closed around hers, steady as he led her onto the floor. The music swelled, and they began to move, and suddenly the ballroom, the whispers, even Lady Cassandra's fury, all of it receded until there was only this. His hand at her waist, her hand in his, the space between them charged with everything unspoken. "You came back?" he said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I wasn't certain you would. I almost didn't. What changed your mind?" "You did." The admission felt dangerous and necessary in equal measure. "You made me remember that I'm allowed to want things, even impossible things." "Nothing about this is impossible, Philippa." The use of her Christian name, here, in public, with hundreds of eyes upon them, was a declaration in itself. "I've been a fool. I should have done this weeks ago, should have been clearer about my intentions." "Alexander." The name felt strange and right on her tongue. "I love you." The words were simple, devastating in their sincerity. "I love your honesty, your courage, your compassion. I love the way you look at the world and refuse to accept its cruelty as inevitable. I love that you defend servants and speak your mind and wear your dignity like armor even when you're bleeding underneath." Tears burned in Philippa's eyes. "You can't. I'm nobody. I have nothing to offer you. You're offering me everything I've been searching for without knowing I was searching." His hand tightened at her waist. "A partnership built on genuine regard rather than calculation. A companion who sees me as I am rather than as my title. A love that exists for its own sake rather than for what it can gain. The world will say I'm using you. Let them. I know the truth, and so do you. That's what matters." The music swirled around them, and he pulled her a fraction closer. Propriety be damned. "Marry me, Philippa. Not because I pity you, not because I'm being noble, but because I cannot imagine a future without you in it. Because you've shown me what it means to be truly seen, and I never want to be invisible again." She should be practical. She should consider the implications, the social censure, the inevitable challenges. But when she looked at him, she saw her own heart reflected back, vulnerable, hopeful, brave enough to reach for something real in a world built on artifice. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." His smile was incandescent. And then, before the entire ballroom, in front of Lady Cassandra and the dowagers and every person who had ever dismissed or mocked or underestimated her, the Duke of Thornbury bent his head and kissed her. The gasps that rippled through the ballroom might have been scandalous. Philippa didn't care. She kissed him back, tasting salt and champagne and the particular sweetness of impossible dreams coming true. When they finally broke apart, the ballroom erupted. Not with mockery, but with applause. It wasn't universal. Lady Cassandra had fled. Several matrons looked affronted. But it was real, and it was enough. "Well," Alexander said, his voice warm with amusement as he tucked her hand into his arm, "I believe we've successfully scandalized London society. Shall we make our exit before they recover sufficiently to demand explanations?" "Lead the way, Your Grace." "Alexander," he corrected. "Or Alex, if you prefer. You're going to be my Duchess. I think we can dispense with the formality." My Duchess. The words should have felt impossible, overwhelming. Instead, they felt right. They walked through the ballroom together, and Philippa found herself noticing details she'd never seen before. The genuine smiles from some of the guests, the grudging respect in others' eyes, the way the crowd parted not in mockery, but in acknowledgement. Aunt Margaret stood near the door, tears streaming down her face, her expression radiantly joyful. Outside, the London night was cool and clear, stars visible despite the city's glow. Alexander handed her into his carriage. Their carriage, she supposed, though the thought still felt surreal, and settled beside her. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly. Philippa considered the question. She thought of the challenges ahead, navigating society as a duchess, managing estates, facing down those who would always question her worth. She thought of the love she'd found in the most unexpected of places, with the most unexpected of people. Terrified, she admitted, and exhilarated, and grateful beyond words. Good. He brought her hand to his lips. Because I intend to spend the rest of our lives ensuring you remain exhilarated and grateful. The terror will fade eventually, I promise. And if it doesn't, then we'll face it together. Spine straight, remember? His eyes gleamed with affection and mischief in equal measure. You taught me that. The carriage rolled through London's streets, carrying them toward a future Philippa had never dared imagine. She leaned against Alexander's shoulder, his arms solid and warm around her, and thought of the girl who had fled the ballroom in tears just weeks before. She had been right about one thing. Her old gown had served its purpose. It had hidden her from the world's cruelty, yes, but more importantly, it had revealed her to the one person who mattered, the man who had seen past the faded muslin to the woman beneath, who had looked at her and found not poverty but richness, not invisibility but magnificent clarity. "What are you thinking?" Alexander asked. "That I should probably commission some new gowns." His laugh was surprised and delighted. "Practical as always, though I'll confess I've grown rather fond of the blue one." "Have you?" "It's where we began, isn't it? The night you fled the ballroom and found me hiding in the library, both of us seeking refuge from a world that demanded too much and offered too little." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "That gown will always be my favorite, no matter how many worth creations you acquire." "Then perhaps I'll keep it," Philippa said softly, "to remind us both that the best things in life are rarely found in the places we expect to find them." "No," Alexander agreed, his voice warm with love and certainty. "They're found in musty libraries and early morning walks and quiet drawing rooms. They're found in moments of genuine connection between two people brave enough to be seen." The carriage carried them through the London night, past the glittering houses of Mayfair toward their shared future. And Philippa, who had spent so long being invisible, who had learned to accept less because she believed she deserved no more, finally allowed herself to believe in the impossible. She had worn an outdated gown to a ball and found her soul reflected in another's eyes. She had fled to a sanctuary and discovered love waiting in the shadows. She had been mocked, dismissed, underestimated, and in the end, none of it had mattered, because the right person had seen her truth. That, she thought, as Alexander's fingers intertwined with hers, was the real magic. Not in transformation or revenge, not in proving others wrong or winning society's approval. The magic was in being known, in being chosen, in finding someone who looked at your patched muslin and faded lace, and saw instead the courage beneath, the dignity within, the magnificent truth of who you really were. 3 months later, they wed in a quiet ceremony at Thornbury's country estate. Philippa wore cream silk, new, fashionable, undeniably expensive, but hanging in her dressing room, carefully preserved, was the blue muslin gown. She kept it always, a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures come wrapped in the humblest packages, and that love, when it's real, requires no adornment beyond the honest human heart.